Front end pressure and back end coverage led to the perfect mix for the Atlanta Falcons defense to take down an elite quarterback like Josh Allen.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On NFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. So on today's Locked On Falcons, we are doing our Week 6 All 22 review, talking about Bijan's big day in part due to Matthew Bergeron improving his blocking. We'll talk about Drake London's big day and how, that was influenced by Zac Robinson's improved play calling, and what a good, potent play action passing attack. Oh my God, I've been waiting so long to talk about that on this podcast. And then, of course, we'll start off with, the story of the game. The Falcons shut down arguably the best quarterback in the NFL, and they did so with the blitz. So we'll get all into that. But if you're wondering who I am, this person who has been waiting so long to talk about play action and good defense and pass rush on this illustrious podcast, I am none other than your humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at falcfans.com, podcasting about them for almost 15 years, coming up on 9 years this Thanksgiving here as the humble host of the Locked On Falcons podcast. And I think each and every one of you that, is an everydayer of this podcast, meaning you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So, of course, the big question is, why were the Falcons so effective at keeping Josh Allen in check? Well, the simple answer is the blitz, baby, right? I charted 16 blitzes in this game for the Atlanta Falcons. They got a 69% nice pressure rate on those blitzes. And even when they weren't blitzing, they still got a high degree of pressure, about 58% pressure rate, as we've discussed on previous all 22 breakdowns. What I consider a pressure probably is maybe a lower standard than what other websites like PFF and Next Gen Stats and whatnot. But their pressure, on those blitzes was very effective. And that's kind of how you can kind of tell, like, is this soft pressure or is this hard pressure, and the Bills' success rate against the blitz when the Falcons brought that pressure was only 31%, which is a very low pressure success rate, particularly when passing. Like, typically you expect your passing game to have a success rate above 45%. And particularly if you're the Bills, you're thinking that's going to be like 55 or higher percent. And then the Bills did have a pretty high success rate when the Falcons didn't blitz, which was about 53% in this game. Now, the main thing with the Falcons blitzes was that they were bringing that pressure pretty consistently on third down, right? Pretty much every third down except for one where the Bills threw the ball. I think they ran the ball on like 2 third downs or 1 third down in this game, which was that jet sweep that got fumbled. But I think outside of 1 third down, the 8 third downs where the Bills passed the ball, the Falcons blitzed on like 7 of those plays. The one exception happened to be the touchdown to Dawson Knox in the first quarter. So the Falcons kind of learned their lesson. We're like, okay, well, let's just keep dialing up pressure. And so the thing that was also standing out, particularly on a lot of those third downs and other situations, was the Falcons using their overload front. And we talked about this a bit during the summer when talking about the 4-3 over front that Jeff Ulbrich was going to bring from the Jets. I did a full 2-hour breakdown of that for the Locked On Falcons insiders back in July, and still very worth checking out for those of you. We'll plug the insider program a little later in the episode, but basically that overload front is when you have essentially a 3-by-1 where you have 3 D linemen lined up on one side of the defensive line and one guy sort of isolated. And the idea of the overload front is to get that one guy a one-on-one, right? You get your best edge rusher one-on-one with one of the tackles, and he wins. But the way that the Falcons have utilized, the Jets did this, the Falcons have really done this a great job, is that you have that 3-by-1, and then you drop one of your linebackers, most often Caden Ellis, but occasionally Divine Diablo in that situation, over the spacing between the 3-by-1, right? So typically you'll have one edge rusher against one tackle on the isolated side, and then you'll have nobody lined up over the guard next to that tackle. And you'll put the linebacker there. And so essentially what happens is offenses will slide their protections away from the isolated defender, and you get a one-on-one, 5 offensive linemen against 5 guys on the line of scrimmage, the 3-by-1 with the linebacker dropping in, and then the 6th guy in the protection, the running back, typically will pick up any other blitzers, typically the other linebacker or a cornerback or whatnot. But what that creates is when you have these one-on-ones, you can kind of confuse the offensive line and bring pressure. And one of the ways that the Falcons did that was dropping somebody on that 3 side, right? And oftentimes that was Jalen Walker, who would line up over the guard as a stand-up rusher on that 3-by-1 side. And he would drop off into coverage, and then you would bring that linebacker, that second-level linebacker, whether it was Caden Ellis or Divine Diablo, to rush on that ISO side, and you would have the guard that was lined up over, against Jalen Walker. Well, Jalen Walker dropping out, he has nobody to block. And so then you can bring another guy on the opposite side, and you can create havoc that way, right? And sometimes you saw the Falcons, instead of having the ISO defender rush that one-on-one on his side, they would drop that guy. Like on the D. Alford sack, they dropped Arnold Ebiketie, who was the ISO defender, and then they brought D. Alford as well as Divine Diablo on the other side, and they created an overload on that side where they basically got 5 rushers against 4 blockers. And, Alford and Diablo were able to come free, and James Pierce was also able to win in that situation. And so the probably my favorite individual performance, at least from the ISO rusher in this game, was a play that got nullified by a penalty. I think it was in the midway through the third quarter, where they had Caden Ellis as the ISO rusher, and he went up against Spencer Brown, the Bills' right tackle, and he hit him with a nasty spin move. And I've been hankering for that spin move here in Atlanta for almost a decade. We haven't really seen it since, the heyday of Dwight Freeney in 2016. And then, of course, Brooks Reed doing it in 2017. And so Caden Ellis, I love to see it. You love to see it. So we'll be breaking down some of those plays on the extended all 22 review. But the key for those overload fronts is it's purely a pass rushing front. And the Falcons were able to unleash it because they were consistently able to get the Bills into 3rd and mediums, 3rd and longs on their 9 third downs. All but 2 of them were the down and distance was the Bills had 6 or more yards to go to get that first down. And as we discussed, last week during the bye week, down and distance dictates pass. 3rd and 6 is where the pass ratio is like 9-1 in the NFL. And the reason why the Falcons were able to get them in those advantageous situations was not sort of the traditional way, which is like, we're going to stop the run on early downs, and then we're going to be able to unleash our passers. Because as we discussed on yesterday's episode, the Falcons did not really stop the run in this game, but they were able to get stops when the Bills were throwing the ball on early downs, right? They were able to play good coverage behind that front. You saw a bunch of PBUs, you saw the tight coverage, right? And that's what this defense prides itself. You marry the front end with the back end, the front end's getting pressure, the back end's locking down guys in coverage, and there's really not a whole lot you can do offensively unless you have an elite quarterback, unless you have elite receivers. And Josh Allen is an elite quarterback, but did not quite look like it in this game because of all the pressure he was under, and his receivers were not winning consistently on the back end. And we talked about the Falcons probably using a lot of man coverage. They did not use as nearly as much as I expected them to use, right? I charted them with only 23% man coverage rate when I figured that number would be maybe 30, 40, 50%, which is the norm against the Bills. But they did use a lot of match coverage when they were in their zone coverage, which is basically you have man rules. When someone comes into your zone, you basically man them up. And so if you add in those match zone coverages, which is often the Falcons use cover 3 match and a couple of cover 4 match. But for the most part, if you throw that into the mix with the man coverage, it basically was they ran man or match coverage on about half of the Bills' opposing dropback. So that was more in line with what we were sort of expecting from this team. And sometimes it's hard to kind of tell when you're charting it, at least for me, where is this cover one or is this cover three match? Because sometimes everybody's basically in man coverage in the cover three match. And then you're just kind of like keying on like, well, Mike Hughes's technique is on this particular play. Looks like he's in zone because his eyes are in the backfield. And so I guess this is cover three match, but it could very easily be man coverage, but that's just a charting technicality and whatnot. But, because of that back end coverage, you saw this team finish with 7 pass breakups in this game, counting a couple of tip passes at the line of scrimmage, including the tip pass on the game sealing interception to D'Angelo Malone, that tip pass coming from Zach Harrison. Now, Josh Allen did have a couple of uncharacteristic misses in this game, but we're talking about 2, maybe 3 if you're really stretching the definition of that. And that's why we always say when you're facing premier quarterbacks like a Josh Allen, you got to be able to get pressure on those guys, and you got to be able to shrink the windows with that man coverage and with that tight coverage on the back end, because they're not going to miss that many throws. And again, we're talking 30 plus dropbacks in this game, 35 if I'm not mistaken. 35, 39, whatever the number was. And you're talking about 2 misses in that game. And if you're not getting pressure on it, he's going to carve you up. And fortunately for the Falcons, they were able to get a lot of pressure in this game with, the blitz being highly effective. And to me, it just illustrates exactly what the vision of this defense is supposed to be, particularly going up against elite quarterbacks. And it gives you a lot of confidence that if the Falcons can do this against this Bills offensive line, against Josh Allen, they should be able to do it against literally anybody. So that will be something that we'll keep an eye on, and hopefully we'll see this trend continue over the course of this upcoming season. But we will flip the conversation to the offensive side of the ball, talking about Drake London. And that will also give us an opportunity to talk about our guy, Zac Robinson, as well as improved play action passing. So we'll get into all of that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons.
I'm Cody Rourke from Locked On Broncos, and this episode is brought to you by Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. This is Peloton's most advanced equipment yet, giving you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or you're cross-training with your favorite instructors like Alex Toussaint. It's training reimagined to make your workout more personal. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with features that help you plan, stay motivated, and hit peak performance. You can let yourself run, lift, flex, and go, while Peloton handles all the rest. Plus, Peloton IQ provides real-time strength coaching, tracking your progress and suggesting weights that challenge you so you can get stronger. Plus, the new movement tracking camera, it counts your reps and corrects your form in real time, making sure every rep is safer and smarter. So let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
And today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel, with the NFL season being here, and we're almost halfway through this bad boy. FanDuel wants to make sure you stay ready with this can't miss offer right now. New customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you will unlock $300 in bonus bets to use all across the FanDuel app. And FanDuel is giving you so many different ways to win, whether we're talking about player props, same game parlays, bet the spread, bet the money line, not only for football, but for so many other sports. And, as we sit here, the line for the Falcons 49ers game coming up this weekend is still 2.5 point favorites for the 49ers. But as I said, we expect that line to move as the course of the week, as we find out more injury information, the impact of Brock Purdy's status, and all that sort of stuff. So if you want to take advantage of this very favorable line for the Atlanta Falcons, especially coming off of this big win, and you don't think they're going to have a letdown game, go on, head on over to FanDuel.com. What are you waiting for? And make sure you download the FanDuel app today in order to get started. So Drake London obviously had a big day in this game, and you really got to see, particularly in the first half of this Bills win, the Falcons really just kind of run their entire passing attack through Drake London. And I love the way that they were able to scheme up ways to kind of feature him and make him look like the true blue number one wide receiver that we all feel like Drake London is capable of being. You saw them moving him in the slot. That's been a thing that we've talked about before on the podcast, and they really started to do in earnest in that week 4 win against the Commanders, and that was kind of Drake's breakout game of this season. And we've always been, since we drafted Drake London, been like, this guy is, as we said on recent episodes, this guy is one of the best slot receivers in the NFL. He's the premier power slot, following the heels of the Anquan Boldens, the Michael Thomases, the Cooper Kupps as that big power slot. And you got to see that on a number of plays, particularly on some of the quick and underneath game stuff that we talked about, again, piggybacking off of that week 4 win against Washington. But the other thing that I thought Zac Robinson did an excellent job with him, and then you saw glimpses of that in that Washington game, which is continuing to get Drake involved, using him in bunches, using him in stacks, and really just working the seams between the numbers and the hashes, right? That portion of the field, that middle fifth of the field, that middle quarter of the field, a lot of hitches, a lot of curls, really working that area of the field. You saw them working that area of the field on the several of the play action passing plays, and you got to see 2 explosives, 2 Drake London off of play action. We talked about this. Can you get Drake London on some of these explosive plays, which has not been something that the Falcons have really featured Drake London really at all in this offense, outside of that week 18 game against Carolina, where Drake was, killing everybody in that game. But outside of that, we haven't really seen Drake London be utilized as an explosive receiver in this offense, certainly to the degree that we saw with Darnell Mooney last year. And as we discussed, the Falcons weren't particularly explosive in the first 4 games of the season, and then boom, exploded, literally, pun intended, in this Bills game. But 2 of Drake's 4 explosive plays in this game came off of play action. And this was by far statistically the best game that the Falcons have had this year, and probably even last year, although I didn't look it up before recording this, last year when it comes to play action efficiency. And we talked about going into the bye week and coming out of the bye week. Are we going to see an improvement with the play action? Because basically, I think I said on a previous episode that if they haven't figured out the play action passing attack by the Miami game, which is week 8, it's probably going to be a lost cause for this team ever figuring out the play action passing game. And at least this week they figured it out. And so the question is going to be, can they maintain this? Can they build off of this? And is this going to be the type of play action passing attack that we've all been envisioning, that you've heard ad nauseum here on this humble podcast for 9, 10, 11, 12, however many months it's been? Hey, where's the play action? Where's the play action? Where's the play action? We finally got to see it. And it's like, okay, you see what happens when you can do that. And so we got to give love to our guy, the number one everydayer out there in terms of Zac Robinson. And featuring Drake London, we got to see a good version of the Falcons play action passing attack, really, for the first time in a very long time, if not the first time ever. Now, when it comes to the play action, I still do have some concerns watching the film. Is Michael Penix good turning his back to the defense, which is something we discussed coming off the heels of that Washington game, that sack he took in the 3rd quarter on a play action passing attack, where he kind of turned his back. And then when he turned around, he was looking initially for Casey Washington to win his one-on-one on the outside. And I'm like, why are you looking for Casey Washington to win your one-on-one? Because Casey Washington's not a one-on-one man beater. And again, I know I'm Mr. Drew on this episode, that negative Nancy. And you're like, Aaron, you're saying so many positive things, but of course you have to insert some negativity into the podcast. And you're like, I got to be me, guys. You got to let me, I'm a peacock. You got to let me strut, or let me fly is, I guess, technically the line for the other guys. But, we talked about this after week 1 when Mooney was out of the lineup in that game, that Casey Washington's not a man beater. Mooney is your man beater, and that's why getting Mooney back healthy is going to do wonders for this offense, hopefully, at some point over the next 2.5 months as the regular season goes. But, I think Penix would have been better served trying to get that ball to Drake London over the middle on that particular play. He got his eyes to Drake, I think, a little too late on that play, and then by then it was too late, and he took the sack. So, again, we're just still collecting evidence on Penix's fit in the play-action passing attack, because obviously this has potentially long-term ramifications, depending on, designing an effective play-action passing attack with Michael Penix at the helm. So that is just another bullet point another data point in this, ongoing investigation on, how do we build a good play action passing attack around Michael Penix. So just another thing I noticed. But other than that one play, you saw a lot of good from Michael Penix when it came to the play action passing attack. And we'll break some of that stuff down in the extended all 22 review. I did see some concerns from folks like, oh, Drake had this dominant first half and then the production fell off a cliff in the second half. Well, I think there's some context that needed, right? You saw the numbers. Drake caught 9 of 11 targets in the first half for 147 yards and 1 touchdown. Should have had 2. And then in the second half, he had 1 catch on 5 targets for only 11 yards in the second half. But as we saw with the Falcons having that lead, they were a little bit more conservative with their play calling, as I said on the Rapid Reaction Monday night. I don't really have a problem with the play calling in the second half. They were running the ball a little bit more. And then when they did throw the ball, they were designing plays to not go to Drake London, right? That Drake London's target rate, he had 11 targets on 19 throws from Michael Penix in the first half. So a target rate of nearly 60%. 60% of Michael Penix's throws went to Drake London in that first half of this Bills game. And then you look at the second half, that target rate was, 5 targets on 13 throws, so only less than 40% target rate, which is still a very high number. That's a, 30% target rate is basically what you expect from a true blue number one. Like Julio typically was like 28 to 32% most seasons. So extremely high number. But a lot of those throws in the second half, why that number was lower was because the Falcons were running like more screens, right? They ran 5 screens in the second half as part of their, like, we're going to still throw the ball, but we want to not stop the clock, right? And so these are just essentially extended runs in terms of the screens. And if you sort of remove the screens where it was clearly the Falcons were trying to get the ball to Bijan and Kyle Pitts and others, Tyler Algier, I think, even had a screen. Drake's target rate would have been 5 of 8 of Penix's throws, and that's still 63%. So basically, they still featured Drake the same way. They just weren't effective, getting the ball to him because the Bills broke up like 3 of those throws. And so, I don't think that's a major concern. So if you're worried about, like, what happened to the passing off in the second half, it's just like, context with the Falcons, understandably, as I explained on Monday night, tried to get a little bit more conservative to try to bleed out clock because they didn't want Josh Allen to do the thing that we all were worried about Josh Allen doing, which is, coming back on the Falcons and us having to deal with another blown lead on another notch on the belt of the misery that is being an Atlanta Falcon fan. So yeah, I wouldn't be too concerned about that. But let's wrap up today's episode talking about Bijan Robinson. But that will really be a kind of a jumping off point to talk about other things, more screens, as we just mentioned, in the offense and what that means. And, getting Bijan more screens. Oh, that's a good thing. As well as, some of the improvements in the run blocking, particularly on the interior offensive line, that contributed to Bijan's big day. And we'll do that to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So with the NFL season back, you want to get back in the stadium to root for your favorite team. And of course, if any of you guys are heading out to Santa Clara, California to check out this weekend's Sunday night matchup between the Atlanta Falcons and the San Francisco 49ers, you want a hassle-free experience to get into that stadium. And Game Time is offering that with their Game Time guarantee, where you always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time at the best price, and all the fees are included. So the price you see is the price you pay. And speaking of what you see is what you get, that's what you get with those panoramic seat views. So why not take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time by downloading Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. And when you get hurt on the job, do you know what you're entitled to? Attorney John Foy does. Lost wages, medical bills, rehabilitation therapy. You should get all this and so much more. The system doesn't make it easy, though, but John Foy does. Everyday attorney John Foy and Associates help people get money and benefits that they deserve after they've been hurt on the job. When it comes to workers' comp, it pays to know what you're entitled to. The strong arm can get you proper medical attention, pay off your medical bills, and get you on a path to good health. And of course, the best part is you pay nothing until John Foy wins your case. no upfront costs. So let the strong arm cut through the insurance company nonsense and fight to get you every dollar. Call John Foy and Associates today at 404-400-4000. That's 404-400-4000, or visit johnfoy.com to get started. They don't just settle, they win. Get the strong arm. Call attorney John Foy and Associates today. So it was nice to see some screen passes to Bijan. That's been an underutilized resource that we saw, two, if my math is correct. Yeah, I think 2 screens to Bijan in the second half, and I think he got 28 yards combined on those 2 screen passes. One of them was a 20-plus yard gain. It's well, these are easy explosives. Just get Bijan in space. Ooh, why aren't we using this, right? And, screens, as I mentioned, have not been a huge part of the Falcons' offense, particularly in the Michael Penix era. They did use a decent amount of screens, or roughly an average, slightly below average amount of screens when Kirk was the starter last year. And again, this goes back to something you've heard me say many times on this podcast, the identity of this passing attack is they want to push the ball down the field. And again, one of the things that has led to the improvement in the last couple of weeks is that the Falcons are, being more selective out trying to push the ball down the field and being more intentional about the quick game and the underneath passing game than they were previously. But when you look at screens specifically, right, and again, if you want to push the ball down the field, then why would we want to throw the ball 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage for screen passes is basically what I'm trying to explain. But the NFL average in terms of screen usage across the league last year was 10% of passes or dropbacks were screen passes. Again, with Kirk Cousins at the helm, the Falcons' screen usage was about 9%, depending on who you look at. You could some of them was 9.7%, I think. So roughly the league average. But with Penix, depending on whose metrics you look at, it was either 7% or 8% last year, and it's about 8% this year, including with a massive increase this past Sunday. And so when we talked about, some of the ways that you can improve this offense, adding more of those easy buttons, again, I think you saw this with Bijan. It's hey, man, if we're going to get 15, 20 yards a pop, just running screens to Bijan, this is easy buttons for us to use, particularly on early downs and whatnot. So the other thing that stood out about Bijan was, that outside zone running scheme that, I remember listening to a podcast where someone was I don't know if the Falcons could be effective running their outside zone run scheme based off of some numbers from ftnfantasy.com. But, here's the thing, guys. According to ftnfantasy.com, the Falcons ran outside zone 16 times against the Bills and gained only 61 yards and had a 50% success rate. So doubling the success rate allowed that the Bills had prior to this game. So the Falcons did have success running their outside zone run scheme. However, though, here's the thing. They didn't chart either of the Falcons' touchdowns as an outside zone run. The one to Tyler Algier early in the game and the one to Bijan later in the game. Now, I would have personally charted it as, outside zone adjacent because it was technically to me mid zone. But my personal opinion, we grouped that into the outside zone tree. But FTN Fantasy grouped it as man/duo runs. And the one thing that one podcaster, I just can't think who it is, but he's so handsome and he's so humble, said was that the Bills defense was very vulnerable to man and duo runs. And so that podcaster, whoever that person is, winds up technically being right, that the Falcons had their most success against man and duo runs as opposed to outside zone runs. So, if you come for the king, you best not miss. So, I will take that victory. Just to avoid, if you're not picking up what I'm putting down, it was me that was saying all that stuff. If you're not understanding the sarcasm, and so I will take that victory lap. I was like, you know what? I said that, I talked about the man and duo runs working, and even though I don't know if that technically counts as man and duo, but we'll take it. We'll take it because I got to be right. You know me. So when you look at those explosive runs, the thing that stood out was the good blocking. Right. I loved on both touchdown runs. They used a great job using motion, right? On the Bijan run, on the Algier run, you had 2 running backs on the field and they used Bijan in motion. And then on the Bijan touchdown run, they used Charlie Warner in motion. And basically that motion was able to move a defender outside the box, lightening the box, right? And then the blockers get a hat on a hat and boom, Bijan, Algier, they get to the second level, right? Trucking dudes, juking dudes, And of course, we heard Joe Marino of Locked On Bills last week on the crossover talk about the Bills' poor tackling, being an issue, and the Falcons were able to expose that issue, and so, what stood out on several of those plays was the good blocking from the interior offensive line, something you wanted to see from both Ryan Newsel and Matthew Bergeron that we haven't seen consistently from those guys, which was one of the questions we had of, is the run blocking going to be as good this year as it has been in the past? And it was, particularly on a handful of plays in this Bills game. We already know that Chris Lindstrom is elite when it comes to this outside zone run blocking scheme, one arguably the best outside zone run blocker in the entire NFL. But our big question was, will you see improvement from Newsel? Will you see improvement from Bergeron, especially given, the loss of Drew Dalman, your former starting center, the loss of Caleb McGarry? You were going to take a step back in terms of run blocking in theory, and you needed to sort of make up that difference by those two guys taking a step forward. And, with Matthew Bergeron in particular, who we've given a lot of grief on this podcast because he's been very hit and miss when it comes to the run blocking, especially, he was really able to hit some of those second level run blocks. And it was really great to see this. It's not been a great first month for Matthew Bergeron, not because he's played particularly poorly. Like, he's given up probably too many pressures to stunts and twists than we would ideally like. But, overall, it's been a quote unquote normal, 4-week performance for Matthew Bergeron through the first 4 games. But the reason why that's a negative is because of the increased expectations, because we spent all offseason being like, we need to see Matthew Bergeron make strides this season. Like, this is a make or break season, the all important year 3 for so many offensive linemen. And so basically the standard has been elevated for what we expect from Matthew Bergeron. And he wasn't meeting that standard. He was meeting the previous standard in terms of what we saw from him last year, but we wanted to see him rise up, as it were. And I think you finally got to see that, at least in this one game. And hopefully we will see this is the new standard that we will see from Matthew Bergeron the rest of the way. And if that is the case, then we will back off on Matthew Bergeron. Hey, Matt, you're doing great stuff. I like hockey. I like poutine. I like all that stuff. Go Canada. And so we will see if he can continue to maintain this same level of play. He wasn't perfect in this game, but certainly had very impactful second level blocks, reach blocks, all things that he had been very inconsistent with in his first 2 years, particularly as a run blocker. Now, when it comes to Ryan Newsel, I thought Newsel's been also kind of up and down. He's been fine for the most part. I know there's been a lot of people saying like, oh, Newsel and Dalman are the same. I think they're basing that too much off of PFF grades, and they're not really the same. Now, it depends on what version of Drew Dalman you're comparing him to. Now, Newsel's in 2025 is not as good as Dalman was in 23 and 24. Now, if you're comparing him to the Bears' Drew Dalman, based off of PFF grades, they seem to be roughly the same. Now, I can't confirm or deny if those PFF grades are accurate. You have to go check out Locked On Bears to get more insight into 25 Drew Dalman with the Chicago Bears. And again, like, Newsel's been fine, and I think this game he was better than he's been, but like, it wasn't like, shades of Drew Dalman. It's like I shouldn't say that. Peak Drew Dalman there's a still sizable gap between peak Drew Dalman and where Ryan Newsel is. But to me, this was a step towards that. Now, when it comes to Ryan Newsel, he's always been viewed by myself as like a stopgap at the center position. And barring some like surprise cut from some veteran player like Eric McCoy from the Saints or something like that, like, Newsel's going to be the Falcons starting center for the foreseeable future, at least through the 2026 season that he is signed through. But if you're the Falcons and you're looking at your long-term option in terms of center, the long-term future at that position, you're hoping kind of to draft a day 3 guy in this upcoming draft, and hopefully that guy will be fast-track development that can kind of come in, not in 2026 and push Newsel, but in 2027, potentially push Newsel or take his job, because Newsel will be a free agent at that point in time. And basically you want that rookie, that 2026 day 3 draft pick, to kind of do to Ryan Newsel in 2027 and beyond what Drew Dalman was able to do to Matt Hennessy back in 2022. And you're hoping that that rookie is going to be the long-term answer at the center position. But Newsel's fine for the time being. He'll be 30 by the time we get to the 2027 season. And so we'll see if the Falcons have, built a off ramp from Ryan Newsel. But in the meantime, he's giving you steady play, and he's fine. again, like 5 out of 10 play. I would say this game was like a 5.5 out of 10. And so we'll see if, again, similar to Bergeron, he can maintain that. But because, like, you're looking at Bergeron potentially, if he can continue to make strides and maintain this, he's potentially a long-term asset, while Newsell's just kind of a 2-year stopgap at the center position. You're fine with what Newsell is at this stage in time. So to me, there's more pressure on Bergeron to step up than there is Newsell at this stage in time. So interior offensive line, playing better. We'll see if they can maintain this, moving forward this upcoming season. And if this is going to be a consistent thing, we'll see if the play action passing can be consistent. And we'll see if this blitz and pressure and coverage and all this stuff also can maintain its consistency. But it was just so beautiful thing to see this past Monday night and watching the All 22. And if you want to get more insights into this All 22 by looking at some of these plays that I'm describing, you can do so by becoming a Locked On Falcons insider at the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. You also get access to me in other ways and breaking news and all that stuff. But it's a 14-day free trial, then $4.99 a month thereafter. So check that out. We'll be back again with a crossover Thursday with Locked On 49ers on our next show. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen by checking us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure you check out Locked On NFL, 2 shows daily to give you the scoop on all the other things going on this week in the NFL and this weekend in Week 7. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.